Hi everyone, thank you for joining today's webinar called Live Winners Announcement and Tearsheet Review. Today's speaker is Dr. Thomas Wiecki. Thomas is the VP of Data Science here at Quantopian. He did his Ph.D. at Brown University where he built computational models of the brain. He's the co-author of the popular probabilistic programming package PyMC3. There's a link to Thomas's forum post in the description of this webinar where you can also ask questions to members of our community. Thanks so much, Thomas, for joining us today. With that, let's get started.
All right. Thank you for the great introduction, Mark. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to have you all join for the second installment of the review of the Tearsheet Challenge. I'm currently in Buenos Aires for some talks, and while this country is known for amazing beef, it is not known for amazing internet speed, so if it at one point gets choppy, apologies in advance. So this second Tearsheet challenge was on the guidance data set, which is a subset of the estimates, depending on how I view it, but we wanted to get something more targeted here. And the reason is that with all the other estimates, factors that have been submitted in the estimates challenge, it's very easy, even if you did include guidance in there, to have that be drowned out just because the guidance universe is, or the number of companies that would give out guidance is much smaller. And also those factors are often not quite as predictive, even though I think a couple of you showed that is not necessarily true in this challenge, but that was sort of our assumption going in. And yeah, so, and I also think the universe size was probably the biggest challenge here. But before going into that and the winner announcements and all the statistics, I wanted to start last time with a quick review of the of what we even look for and how to read this Tearsheet that I posted a couple of months ago in the community, and we're using here as the submission format. So the whole logic behind looking at alpha decay, or how the IC or IR, the information coefficient, is changing depending on how you delay your signal, right, is that when we actually run your factor, right, let's say we just run a single factor, let's say this one on here, it might have turnover that exceeds the turnover that we actually want in our portfolio, right? And what happens then is that the optimizer, which ultimately gets turns our target portfolio into an actual portfolio, taking risk but also turnover into account. Let's say this would have a turnover of 30%, but then our turnover target, or our maximum allowed turnover, is 15%, right? So on the first day, we could only trade into 15% of that. Well, let's say we are already in that portfolio, right? So it's just change over. Then we would trade into 15%, and then only the next day would we be caught up with that. And you can extrapolate that, right? So if there is more turnover that the factor wants and less turnover that our portfolio allows, we will always play catch up with the changing factor. And what that causes is a certain delay in trading. So we're always basically trying to catch up to the factor value, but we will sort of start falling behind to a certain extent. So there will be some lag into what the portfolio that we have on that day in the market to what the target portfolio is. And that is one reason why it's really important for us to look at how does the predictiveness of your factor change if there is some trading delay in it. And that's exactly at the core of this Tearsheet here. And that's the most top left plot over here, where we're looking at how predictive, so IR is basically the Sharpe ratio of your specific return. So here we have specific and total returns. You can just think of this as the Sharpe ratio. If we trade your factor, and with factor, what I mean here is the holdings of the algorithm. So as we also explained in various posts, we're not really treating your algorithm as like an algorithm anymore, which places trades. Instead, what we're doing now is we're just looking at your end of day holdings of your algorithm. So how you got into that portfolio doesn't matter at all to us. We discard that information, right? And this analysis does that too. So it loads in your backtest and it only looks at the end of day holdings and evaluates how predictive are your end of day holdings for the next day returns or the returns in 2 days. So that is what this is showing. Okay, so that's what a factor is. And here you can see this is the first submission by Joachim. And here you can see that it has a Sharpe ratio of about 1, total and specific, if there's a 1-day delay in trading it. So on Monday, the factor was posted, and then on Tuesday, this is sort of the predictiveness of it. And then on Wednesday, 2 days after that, it's still almost just as predictive. And then actually it stays, as you can see here, very constant over the next 14 days. So this is a really good sign that there is no alpha decay, excuse me, that you can see here. So that is very good. And it means that if we were to incur some trading delay, right, let's say over 5 days, then we would still get a lot of predictive power from this factor. So this factor is not susceptible to this problem of like building up lag. With enough time, this will certainly go down. But yeah, so what we're looking for here is that like, well, higher is always better. We definitely care about specific, not just total, but both of those ideally point in the right direction. And also that there is like no super sharp drop. So a lot of high turnover factors, you might find that they have like a really high IR on the first day and then half of that the second day, and then they might even turn negative on subsequent days. So that is like, would be a big red flag. Here we see the same thing on the right side with just the cumulative returns of that, of the total returns and the specific returns again. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, which means we just have the first 4 delays from this left side just to make the plot not as cluttered. And you can see, well, of course, that we already knew that like there's little alpha decay. So these cumulative returns, even with 4-day trading delay, look almost identical to if we traded it just 1 day delayed. And here we're just, I mean, it's cumulative returns, right? So here we're just looking, are there like periods of big drawdowns, or is it nice and steady? So this looks pretty steady. There's a small drawdown here, but who knows what that means. It's a short period of time. Then the exposures in here are a box plot, which means, so here's the median, that line over here, and here's sort of the, I think this is the 25th, and this is the 95th and 5 percentile. Actually, this is the interquartile range. It works a little bit differently, but you can just think of this as basically what the distribution looks like. So you can see volatility, the exposure is changing. So this is the daily distributional box plot of the daily exposures of your algorithm. So you can see over time, like volatility changes quite a bit, but on average, or the median is still fairly centered around 0. So there could be some factor timing going on, or it's just dipping into these exposures without meaning to. And the point that we made several times that I don't want to reiterate here is we don't really care too much about this. So as long as there are specific returns, which we can see over here, so these are the cumulative returns of those very same factors. So here we see, okay, most of it comes from specific returns, but even if there was a component of common returns, that doesn't really matter, because what happens when we average all the factors together, a lot of the exposures will average out. So the key point here is that you should only look at this for your own understanding, but it's not really a problem for you to solve. So if there are exposures, that is totally fine as long as there are still specific returns. You should not go in and like either do alpha orthogonalization or just set up the optimizer to sort of squash that out because risk is bad. So that makes it more difficult for us. So we much rather see your signal, your factor, in its original form without like any sort of tinkering to like make the risk smaller or something like that. So yeah, we have the cumulative returns and annualized volatility. So yeah, most of the volatility comes from specific returns. And then here we see the holdings. So here's the universe size in blue. And as you can see, that is small compared to the estimates, but the reason is that, as I said in the beginning, not a lot of companies actually give out guidance. So the data set is very choppy, and yeah, so that is definitely the biggest challenge here. And what we'll see when we look at some of these tear sheets is that a lot of them have very different sizes in the universes, and the reason for that is that certain fields are populated to varying degrees, and depending on how you deal with missing values, and then how many factors that depend on different fields you combine, you can increase your universe size if you have factors that rely on all kinds of different ones, and then you just say replace those missing values with zeros or something like that. So you can sort of boost that your holdings that way, and a couple of people have done that, so that we will see some bigger universes. But this is like, I think if you only use like maybe one or two fields, it will be around 300. And then of course the turnover in red. So we want this to be on the low end, and this is like, I think in a pretty nice spot between 5 and 15%. That is totally reasonable, and the alpha decay is not high, so this looks great. And then the last one over here is the quantiles of your daily holdings. And so it is essentially also giving you a sense of what is the distribution of your daily holdings, of your daily weights. And so this is the 95th percentile, and this is the 5th percentile. This is the median, the 25th percentile, and the 75th percentile. And then you can see, give me 1 second, sorry, that then you can see that this is like nice and distributed. So this is really what we're looking for here, is how how's the spread in your weights. So often what will happen if you rely too much on the optimizer is that you will squash the weights to be between to be just equal weighted. So there's no sensitivity in your signal, and that's not something that we want. So when going over these, the first thing that I noticed, and especially in comparison to the last submission, is that the quality has gone way, way up. So a lot of the common error modes, like what I just described with equal weighting, or just like excessive turnover, almost none of you, I think none of you really had that problem in your algorithm. So it seems like definitely in the last Tearsheet review, probably also having good templates is really helpful in letting you build better factors. So that was really amazing to see. So everyone did a really great job there. The turnover for everything looks really good. So yeah, I mean, through the board, we just had very high quality submissions for this one. And yeah, there isn't like, I think, too much to really show in terms of like, oh yeah, this was like an error mode and this is what could have been done better, because like these all look pretty good. Like one pattern that I saw a few times is that, and I'm not quite sure which of the guidance fields that caused that behavior, but there is like certain dips. So yeah, one thing is like, and I mean, this is a problem of guidance in general, is like, well, if companies stop giving out guidances, right, your universe size could just drop. So that is something, if you were to trade this, to actually look out for. But yeah, there were these gaps, and in the data set apparently sometimes, definitely like this, right? So where it just drops, I guess, probably quarterly. And you can see that here in the distribution as well. So that is something, I guess, to look out for. But if the data is not there, then there's little to do. So most of the comparison here we actually did on the just the IR. So yeah, this had the same behavior. And the other thing I really liked is you guys started really being explicit on like this, the second submission, and like sort of describing that. So the more information here, and we also had the questionnaire that I invite everyone to fill out. So in the beginning, no, there was the Japan one. I got confused. So yeah, like any words on like the intuition behind it, or also what it does is much appreciated. And then some of you also started versioning your submissions. So maybe you had 3 different submissions. So there will be 1.3 and 3.2. So that I think is also just a really good idea. And so definitely keep doing that. So yeah, let's switch to the analysis over here, which has some interesting stuff in it. So the last time I was just going through manually and just looking at and determining the winners manually. This time I got a little bit more systematic. So this will probably be a process where every time I do this, the analysis will get a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more automatic. So this is my first attempt at grading this with a more, yeah, I guess data science approach. So I ran all of your submissions through our harness so we can rerun them and with like the same parameters. And then I just loaded in here. This is our own research container. And here we analyze, yeah, the outputs of your algorithm. And the first thing I'm showing here, the first thing that I just looked at is who submitted how many algorithms. So James Villa 76. Those might not all be the same ones, right? They might just be follow-up versions, which is totally fine. So this is just something that I was interested in. So yeah, we had also what I really like to see is like just the breadth of like individual authors. So that is really cool to see so many different people submitting algorithms. We had 55 submissions in total. Let me zoom in a little bit. 55 submissions in total. So that, yeah, I mean, we're really excited about how this, how many submissions we've gotten, and also the high quality of submissions. So that was really amazing. And then here's one thing. The first thing I looked at here is just how many of the stocks are in the QTU, just because the requirement was that everything had to be in the QTU. So here you can see that everyone is like 100% inside the QTU. We checked if guidance was used outside of this. Then the next thing I looked at were the correlations. And this is where things started to become a little bit more, I guess, difficult. So this is the clustered correlation matrix between all the one-day returns of the factors. And as you can see, there are definitely these clusters, right? So all of these are like very highly correlated. These are very highly correlated. These 3 here are very independent to everything else, right? So these clustered correlation matrices are really helpful, and Seaborn, the cluster map, gives me that. I use these all the time. They're amazing. So yeah, we see these pockets of correlation, and I mean, the most obvious interpretation is that, well, there are these are just submissions of the same idea, right? Just multiple times, which of course is totally fine. So these do show up, but I decided to dig a little bit deeper and look at the clusters individually of this. So here I use SciPy cluster hierarchy, which essentially allows me to recover this clustering over here. So this is a dendrogram, and I will show a little bit how to think about that. So I compute the the linkage between that, and then I plot this. So this is essentially this dendrogram plot. And the way to read this is so each item over here would be an algorithm, and then the length between them. So these two, for example, have a correlation of around 0.49. So the length of this shows me how correlated the two are to each other. So these two, for example, this is a distance metric. So these two are extremely correlated, so almost 0.9. So they're very close together. And then these two and this one are also fairly close together, around 0.9 correlation, so 1 minus 0.1. So the correlation distance is 0.1 between them, inside of this cluster. And then you go up. So then I can say, okay, I want basically to treat everything the same that has a distance smaller than 0.2 in correlation space. So that is what that black line here means. And you can see by the colors how that clustering ends up going. So this is one cluster. So I'm going to say, okay, these are all identical for the intents of this analysis. These algorithms over here are all identical. These are all identical. So if you don't really know what this means, it doesn't matter. But basically, the idea is we're clustering those things together, defining a threshold that, and then we have basically algorithms that are very similar, correlated to each other from this analysis. So I do this, and then I plot. So every line here is one cluster, and then I just plot the authors inside of that cluster. So James Villa, you can see here, all of his submissions are very correlated, which, as I said before, probably relates to the fact that he just posted multiple submissions of the same idea, just with just like refining the idea multiple times. So I can see that here, that like, okay, they're all like very correlated. Then this next cluster here is Gregorio. So all of them are very correlated to each other. So that is similar to what but then here you can see when these two are actually separate. So they end up in two different clusters. And there's no one else in that cluster. So these first few here make a lot of sense, right? They're all the same author. But we can see there's also some of them where multiple authors end up in the same cluster. So here, Kuo-en and Kyla M actually seem to find something similar in the data set. And Daniel Cascio and G.S. Rao as well. This is just the Anthony Jackson cluster. But then here again, Shiv Chawla and Daniel Cascio and Inigo Monkey. So of course, I mean, this is expected, right? If the data set has just a limited degrees of freedom, a limited things you can do with it, and an even smaller amount of things that are gonna be logical and even work. So it makes sense that people would find like similar things in the data set. And this is what this shows. So yeah, here we can see Vladimir and Alex end up in the same cluster. But also a lot of people who like have very unique submissions. So Vidran Rusman here, Leo C, and Coppola are in Quantrader. So this is basically now a good step to have taken in this analysis. And the next thing I did was, for each cluster, I will just choose a single algorithm, right? So because for us, it doesn't make sense basically to like license 5 times the same algorithm, right? Even if they come from different authors. So I choose a winner in each cluster. Of course, if there's only one person in that cluster, then that person will be the winner. But yeah, so I basically condense this down, and I just choose the best, the winner based on the, I think what I did is the average, yeah, I compute the score here. How do I compute that? I think it's just the first, yeah, the mean of the alpha decay of days 1, 3, and 5. That's what I do here. And yeah, so that is the clusters I picked. So these are basically the cluster winners in each one, and I already sorted them. And then I also have the positions here, which are wrong. Sorry, the turnover here is wrong, but the positions are right. And these are already sorted. So I sort by that score that I have, and that is what will determine the winners here. So now we basically are already done, and the next step will be in looking at the individual tear sheets. So let's look at them, and these are now ordered. So the first 10 tear sheets first unified by the clustering that I showed, and then so we only have the cluster winners, and then sorting those cluster winners by the the specific Sharpe ratio of days 1, 3, and 5. I'm not concerned about the turnover and the position size here too much, just because everyone was like sort of in a similar range there. So if there would be like really big differences, then I would include that in that score, but here that wasn't necessary. And well, not surprisingly, maybe for some who already looked at the tear sheets, Vidrun Rissman is the winner, so he makes the first place according to this analysis, and yeah, so that is like again an excellent submission. So he already had the best submission in the estimates data set. So amazing job by Vidrun. So here, these actually also include the out of sample. So that will be interesting to look at. So the submission date is like end of 2008, and there's a whole year of out of sample that we have. And here you can see, so he did not overfit. It still looks just as good in the out of sample as the in sample. And that is where we'll see the biggest differences. Now, in the guidelines of the submission, I said that we will not look at out of sample for selecting the winners, and I stand by that statement. So while we will look at it, it will not make a difference in whether a winner is chosen. But it does make a difference for the algorithms that we will license. So if the algorithm does not do well in the out of sample, then we will probably not want to send a license. We will not start that process of like trying to license it from you. But nonetheless, you still will get the prize if you end up in the top 5 spots. Okay, well, so yeah, as you can see, like very consistent alpha, just nice and steady return profile. There are some exposures, but that's fine, right? So this isn't quite as important here. The turnover stays below 0.2. The holdings are sort of in this regular range for this type of data set. And the distribution is nice and spread out. So yeah, just picture perfect submission. And Vidrun is the first winner. Congratulations. The next winner is Vladimir. So here you can see pretty much the same thing, like really nice decay profile. Here's a little bit more decay, but it's so mild that this is totally fine. But here we can see that actually in the out of sample, it starts to sort of go flat. So yeah, so that would like give me pause to think that maybe there was some overfitting. So Vladimir, yeah, I would definitely encourage you to like think about that, whether there are like, I mean, of course, like no factor works everywhere. So it's not guaranteed that this is overfit, right? Market regimes change. The factors change, so I'm not like looking to call anyone out, but yeah, it's just that is what it looks like. So take that as you may. But yeah, maybe they are like, I mean, we all overfit to some degree, right? So I think it's a good opportunity to take and sort of look over your research process and identify any potential sources of overfitting. And maybe that allows us to like improve our process in dealing with these. The next winner is Anthony Jackson. So here are the names of the winners with a very similar profile again. So the total IRR is a little bit lower. That's what third place. But also we see that like it sort of goes flat in the out of sample. Yeah, and here this looks pretty good. Turnover dips a bit higher on some days. It's not too bad. So that is, where are we? We are 1, 2, 3, 4. So Indigo Monkey is the 4th placed winner. Pretty similar picture. Also the other sample, pretty flat. So yeah, it is, I mean, it is very, very difficult to find something that works, and to find something that works out of sample is next to impossible. So yeah, it is extremely difficult what we're trying to do here, and I think everyone did a fantastic job. So yeah, this is just to for some feedback. Yeah, otherwise, also just like the way it's constructed looks really good. Again, the turnover dips into a bit higher territory, but it's not terrible. And then James Vila is the 5th place winner. So here again, nice decay profile, and that one seems to do a little bit better in the out of sample, even though it gets a little bit choppy, but nonetheless it doesn't go completely flat. So then these are the top 5 winners. So congratulations to all of them. Thank you so much for submitting. We will be in touch regarding the prize money. And then here are some more of them that, so I plotted the top 10 according to this analysis. And so let's go through them. So these are not winners, but nonetheless, some of those actually, we would like to initiate the process of licensing the factor, so depending on the out of sample. So this one actually looks really good, and Kuo-Wen, we will try to get in touch with you regarding licensing this factor. So yeah, the IR isn't quite as high, but it still actually is just almost in line with like the first 5 places, and it also does well in the out of sample. So that's really cool. And yeah, so it does have this sort of movement of the Holian patterns, but that doesn't seem that bad. The turnover, I guess, is a bigger concern here. And here, actually, so this is a good case where, like, yeah, there definitely seems to be something going on driven by this over here, by the holdings, that is affecting the returns distribution. So that is something, Kuo-Wen, if you're listening, to maybe try and sort of smooth out a little bit, or look at what's driving this effect and see if there's anything you can do about that. Then honorary mention of Bala Sridhar. Hope I said that correctly. So again, the Sharpe ratio isn't the highest, but actually it does even better in the out of sample than in the in sample. So that is really impressive, and also something that we're very interested in licensing. This one also looks great. Again, it goes flat in the out of sample, but great job, Gregorio. And then there's another submission by Joachim, which also like sort of falls flat a bit in the out of sample, but otherwise also looks really great. So amazing job. There's another one by Joachim, so they're uncorrelated. This one actually does way better in the out of sample. So yeah, not sure, Joachim, if there's anything for you to learn between those two, but that would be really interesting. Then here I just plotted the next 15. Daniel Cascio, that looks good. Kuo-Wen, another one that looks good. Here's another one by Joachim that like has a really good upward spike in the out of sample. So it's kind of interesting that like most of the really high ones seem to not do quite as well in the out of sample. So maybe actually that is one indicator of overfitting, is that it does really, really good in the in sample. But that is just an off the cuff theory. I don't want to say this as fact, but logically it makes sense. Okay, Kuo-Wen, another great submission here. So yeah, just great job. So here now, the last thing, or the second to last thing that I'm gonna show is that the correlations with estimates winners. So one concern was have people just submitted their estimates things and just like broken them down to the contest. So here is the correlation matrix, the clustered correlation matrix again, of all the guidance. So this is sort of the field that is more active. So that's the correlation matrix that we looked at before. But now the first 5 over here in this upper left corner are the submissions from the estimates winners. And you can see that the correlations are really, really low. So there's no bleed over from the estimates challenge. They're all really uncorrelated, which is great. So I was really happy to see that. And then, of course, this wouldn't be complete if I didn't take the ones that we wanted to license. So we will reach out to you. So this is not just the winners. This is part of the winners and part of the non-winners that we want to initiate the process of licensing them. And here, just combine them together, and you can see that, yeah, I mean, diversification is like the only thing that reliably works in quant finance, the only free lunch that's out there. And yeah, you can see that like the aggregate of those works better than each of the individual ones. So that's really, really cool. So this is a really strong factor. It like does really well in the out of sample as well. Of course, I could start overfitting on this as well now myself. But nonetheless, like this looks really good. A lot of the averages sort of average out, and turnover is meaningful, and our universe increases by the fact that like we have all these diverse factors on this with non-overlapping universes, not to some degree. There's, I guess, a little bit concerning that like by combining them, I lose some of the sensitivity. So that is something that I might go back and visit, but that's just the very first attempt of like very simply just combining the holdings of the 5 ones that I picked out from above and average them together. So yeah, that is the end of that analysis. If you have any questions, submit them in the chat, but otherwise, just also feel free to post them in the thread here, or just contact me via some other ways. And with the Japan one is the next one that we will do. So I'm excited about that. There was definitely a curveball that we threw, and I think you guys did really, really well. So thanks again for everyone to submit. And yeah, keep playing away at this stuff. It's really, we really love what we're seeing here, and we're very excited about it. So with that, I give it up to Mark for closing us out.
Hi, everybody. I wanted to give those of you watching a minute or two. If you have any questions, you can submit them now. We have, about 15 minutes left in this allotted time here. And while we're taking in questions, if there are any, I just wanted to make a note that Thomas referenced the potential for some of the algorithms submitted to be licensed. And thanks again for all of your submissions.